Today I have a whole bunch of herbs to plant up in a variety of containers, and where most gardeners go wrong with herbs is not realizing that they don't all enjoy the same growing conditions. So the ones that I have grown from seed are first parsley, and I have 3 varieties of parsley, and this is a really good example of the difference of ones that you buy at a garden center versus ones that you grow yourself. Now I grew all of these myself, but the ones you tend to get at the garden center have multiple plants in each pot, just like this one. Now parsley sometimes has great germination and sometimes doesn't, so I always seed it fairly heavily, but this one has, I can't count it, well over a dozen plants, and this one has 3. Now one of them has only just germinated. There is one nice big strong one and one that just has about 3 leaves, and you can easily see the difference. At first glance you may think that this pot is better. Look at all that foliage, but the individual plants themselves are pretty small and spindly, and they could very easily run out of space or start to go to seed early because the plants are stressed. This one, now this one plant will end up being nice and big and bushy. You're just going to have to wait a little bit longer. And I think I'm going to leave all 3 in this pot. They're about 2 inches apart, and I think that that's going to work, especially if you're harvesting the leaves regularly, which I definitely will be. So I have 2 of the parsley double curled, and both of those came up. I have another one right here that is all by itself in the pot, so that's going to be a beautiful healthy plant. This one is very thickly sown, and I do expect it to go to seed fairly early. I have 2 of these. They are forest green. I think it might also be a curly variety, and this is your typical Italian flat leaf. And this one I'm going to thin. So I only have 1 of these, and I'd like it to do really well. So I'm going to pull out the smallest ones and aim to maybe end up with 3 to 5 plants that are at least an inch apart maybe. So there's 1, 2, 3. So I'll take this one. Oh, there's 2 right here together. That may be okay, but I'm going to pinch 1. So there's 3 now. Then I'm going to take all of these little ones out of the center. Okay, now there are 5, and that's going to end up being way healthier, give us plenty of foliage, and hopefully not bolt too early in the season. I can sometimes get a full season out of parsley, and then it'll overwinter and flower the next year. Parsley sometimes takes a while to get going. These are at least 2 months old, but I think I probably fell off of the feeding schedule a little bit. So I will be very happy to use these little ones that I pulled as part of my lunch today, and they won't completely go to waste. I started my basil a little bit late, so I picked up a basil, and there are 8 plants coming from the very center. They're all jammed together, so I don't expect this is going to last very long, but I'm going to plant some more seeds today too, so that I have a good succession going. This is stevia, which is the sweetener, but you may not know that it's also quite a nice plant that you can grow, and you can pull off this leaf and eat it just like that, and you can see that it grows quite tall. This one's actually been pinched right there above the second set of leaves, and then this grew, and I'm going to actually cut that further because I do want it to bush out. And this is a nice thin one that I'm just going to pinch out. That's going to continue to bush out. By doing that, all of these little side shoots are going to start to grow, so we'll end up with 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 growth points instead of 3. And as it grows, you continue to do the same thing. If you pinch out the top 2 to 3 inches of each stem, if you're only looking for a little bit at a time, that's perfect, and it's going to keep the plant healthy and keep it bushing out as it grows. Next, I have 3 rosemary plants. This is barbecue rosemary. Exact same thing. I could pinch this out. I'm not going to right now because it's not overly large yet. Oh, rosemary is a perennial, but not quite in my area. I have had success in my greenhouse, not this past year, but the year before. I'll be trying that again. I have verbena, lemon verbena, beautiful, beautiful. A little bit like lemon balm, which is a perennial here. This lemon verbena is more of a woody shrub, and it doesn't survive over winter, but I've had success bringing it inside as a houseplant. Next, I have tricolored sage. Same, it isn't quite hardy. I have lots of regular sage. I just like this one mostly for the foliage, so I probably won't use it a whole lot because I have the regular sage for that. But it's going to look gorgeous in a container. Over here I have lemongrass, and I did grow this from seed. This is the first time I've had success growing lemongrass from seed. There's quite a few plants here, so I think I'm going to split this in two. Now, this isn't all because I also have a few things that I pulled out of the landscape. I have an entire 3x5 bed full of tarragon. Tarragon is my favorite herb by far. I use it in everything. It makes an amazing mustard tarragon roast chicken, scrambled eggs, roasted potato dishes, and so much more. I just love it. But I have a full 3x5 raised bed that's starting to become seriously infested with weeds. So it's a little bit wilty because I dug it up about 20 minutes ago. So we're going to get this planted again ASAP. I also have, let me just show you the pot here. I also have a chunk of chives here, some beautiful looking English thyme, and some oregano. These things are all easily hardy here. So that's going to go in one container. What I need to do now is arrange things and figure out what's going to go where. Oh, I forgot one. This is Moroccan mint, which I bought last year, potted it up into this lovely little pink container, and pretty much ignored it for the second half of the season. So this is all the dead foliage from last year, but there is a little bit of new growth. So we're going to get that out of here, get rid of all the dead stuff. And mint spreads so fast that those small little shoots that are coming up will have no problem filling the pot again once we get it all fixed up. I had a great idea for the biggest pot. I've just found some tomato seedlings in the greenhouse. These are tiny Tim. They only get about 12 inches tall, loaded with small red cherry tomatoes. So that is going to go in the biggest pot here, along with the basil. Now, a lot of these are going to be patio containers because I do find with a little bit of afternoon shade, then they won't dry out nearly as fast. And water can sometimes be a problem in the summer. I don't want to be using a ton of water. Our well does have a tendency to go dry if we have a drought. I don't want to be watering a ton of pots multiple times a day. So everything that I plant in containers this year is going to get afternoon shade. Some of these things do prefer full sun, but I do want to see how they handle a little bit more shade so that I can make a better plan going forward of how to manage these pots. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some parsley, we're going to put the stevia, and we're going to put some seeds. So you may have noticed that I didn't mention dill or cilantro, and that is because these are cool weather herbs. They prefer to be started before your last frost. And if the root ball gets too warm, which can happen in containers, they can bolt really fast. So I direct seeded my herbs over in the vegetable garden, and then I have a few more right here. I did a second succession over on this side. But I will add some dill seed, I think, and we're going to keep it in the back of this container. So the other benefit of having these on the deck is I don't have to put shoes on and go out into the garden if I just want a quick snip of something while I'm cooking. So I'm going to put the stevia in the front. I've got my curly parsley with the 3 seedlings, and then the peony that I thinned and has 5. We're going to put both of those in this pot. That is pretty good root system. Some of these are small, so I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to put 1 on each side. Now I have pre-filled all of these pots with potting soil, and I watered them already just to make sure that they were damp all the way to the bottom. And once we top these up, then we'll be watering them again. So at the moment, the seedlings are a little bit proud of the potting soil. They're sitting about an inch above. So at this point, I'm going to top this up. And then we're going to water it before we put the seeds in. And that is because watering can easily displace the seeds, wash them all over the place, and I'd really like them to stay where I put them. So I'm going to put some dill seed along the back, and this isn't a long-term planting, so I'm going to sprinkle them fairly thickly. We're going to put it along the back, and then I'm actually going to put some spinach in the middle, just since I have the seed, and there is a little bit of extra space in there, so why not? I'll likely harvest most of these as baby greens anyway, so I'm going to put them a little bit thicker than I would normally out in the garden. I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny bit more soil along the top, and that will help keep these seeds from drying out too fast while they're waiting to germinate. And then while they settle in, I'm going to keep them in the shade for the next couple of days before moving them out full time into their permanent position. Just a very light sprinkle to moisten the soil that I just put over top. And then that is ready to go. Now the next one's going to be a little bit more instant impact because this is our perennial pot. I'm going to start with the tarragon, which I'm going to put right in the middle. Tarragon can get fairly tall, but if it's a little bit more restricted, like it would be in a pot, it's going to stay a little bit smaller. This was going to be for this season only, and then when it starts to get a little bit root bound, I'm going to move them out back into the garden to overwinter for next year. So these were right behind me in front of the greenhouse. I had 4 or 5 clumps of chives. I did not need that many, and I did want some in a container, so that's a little better. So we have tarragon, we have chives, and we're going to put the thyme and the oregano a little bit closer to the front. Just as I add a little bit of soil in. Now there's a bit of a mix of perennials in this pot, but thyme and oregano and rosemary and sage, these are your more Mediterranean herbs, and they generally like different conditions than things like basil and dill and cilantro. First of all, they are perennial to here. We are zone 6 here. Most of these are hardy to 5 and 4 too, I think, except maybe the thyme. But Mediterranean herbs like drier conditions. They like as much sun as possible. So this container is not going to get overwatered. It will not get overfed. And it's going to go in a position of more sun than the other containers. There, this one looks much, much better right off the bat. And these were all free things that I pulled out of other areas of the garden. We are not going to overfeed or overwater this. It likes free draining soil, a good open sunny position, but of course it doesn't want to be bone dry. So being in a container, we will want to water it, ideally early morning so that it doesn't stay damp for too long on top. But then I won't be watering it again until the top of the soil is very, very dry. Now, next I'm going to do a couple of smaller pots just to go on this picnic table here. So I'm going to put a rosemary and a parsley in pots all on their own. So I have a nice small terracotta pot. I'm not going to put the tag in that one because I know this is a rosemary. There, and this is another one that can easily handle full sun. So there's the rosemary. Now I've changed my mind. I don't want this parsley in full sun, so it's going to go up on the deck, but I'm still going to put it in a pot all by itself. I also want to see how things respond to being planted, excuse me, to being planted in different conditions. So I have some parsley mixed in with that pot over there, but this is one that has a ton of seedlings all together. So I'm going to put that on its own, expecting that it might bolt and I might get rid of it. I don't want it to ruin one of my mixed planting containers. Now don't forget that container plants need to be fed. I have an organic slow release fertilizer that I mixed in just lightly. I actually have less in the Mediterranean pot than I do in everything else. But even with that, and even with a good potting soil, most of them will run out of nutrition in about 6 weeks. So after that, I just like to use like a liquid seaweed or some other liquid organic feed once every week or so, and then that helps keep everything happy through the season. Now I'm going to do my last big blue pot, and my plan with this one is to bring it inside over the winter. Now I'm going to start with the lemongrass, but I'm going to break it in half. So the other one is going to go in a pot all by itself. There we go. So there's just a few stalks here, but they're going to get pretty big. And I don't expect to harvest this at all over the summer. I'll use the other pot for that, but it is going to add some really nice height to the back of the pot. We're going to put one rosemary next. I would like to put 5 things in these pots, but this pot is just a little bit small for that, and I do like to use what I have, so I didn't go and buy any new pots, especially where I'm trying to limit what I plant in containers this year just for water management. The tri-colored sage is going to go in next, followed by the lemon verbena. This one is really good for tea. I did use quite a bit of what I had last year. I actually had my last plant for 3 years. You just prune it back and bring it indoors. But I did that with a lot of things last year, and some things just had to go because it was too much to manage. Now this is another one that can easily handle full sun. And things like the rosemary and the sage, those are Mediterranean, like we talked about before, so they can handle drying out, but the lemon verbena and the lemongrass is a little bit more sensitive to that. So we'll see how these handle being in the same pot. So what do we have left? This last rosemary, I think, is going to go out into the garden, and I have 2 leftover parsley that's going to go out into the garden also. So we're going to set those aside. Now here is the rest of the lemongrass. This is the second pot that I'm going to leave right here on the table, along with this rosemary. Now my poor table's covered with dirt, but that's what it's for. There we go. And here is the last one. So here are those tiny Tim tomatoes, and I'm going to put those in the back. Now this pot is going to go on my front step, which means afternoon shade. So we'll see how the tomatoes like that. But full sun, officially, is 6 to 8 hours. And in the summer, when the sun is coming up at, let's say, 5 o'clock in the morning or so, if this doesn't get shade until 12 or 1, that's your 6 to 8 hours right there. So that should be fine. Now these don't take up a lot of space now, but they will. They will bush out really well. I've put it towards the back so that it'll spill over a little bit and make it a bit easier to harvest. But I think it's going to look a little bit plain with the one basil, so let's stick one of those parsleys in there as well. And you can see these lower leaves are already starting to yellow, which usually means it's starting to run out of nutrition. So this is a good time to get these planted and in the ground. And I just cleared out a bunch of space out of my greenhouse so I can bring up all my peppers and my watermelons out of my grow room. It is mid-May, and our average last frost date is about now, which means I don't completely trust that I can plant out things like tomatoes and basil, which are very susceptible to a frost, just out in the garden yet. So that is the big reason why I wanted to put some in pots today. The rest of my tomatoes going out in the ground are going to wait probably another week or 2, and that'll make sure that they're properly hardened off. Now things like parsley, dill, and cilantro, those things can all easily handle mild frost, and they actually prefer to grow in cooler conditions. And that's why I direct seeded a couple of times out in the garden. I also have a pot here behind me with mustard and lettuce and a couple of green onions. That's something else that easily tolerates cooler weather and grows well in cooler weather. And the last thing we have to deal with is this poor mint. So this needs a little bit of damage control. I'm going to start by clipping off all of the dead stems. And there's some new growth down there, which is good. I almost tossed this in the compost a couple of weeks ago, but luckily I didn't. There. Now there's 2 good strong shoots here and a bunch of small ones coming from that side. So I still have the tag too. And I'm going to pot this right back into the same pot, ideally. Oh, there it goes. This was drying out so fast. Oh, okay, so we have some good white roots on this side. Well, those are the good roots. We definitely want to keep those. The rest of this, almost all of it, those are dead roots for sure. Those are all rotted. We are not losing anything by getting rid of all of that. And now I can center this in the new pot so that it can grow out from these roots. And before long, we're going to see a bunch of brand new shoots, and those are going to start to grow much faster. So we'll fill this with some brand new soil and get this centered in the pot. Perfect. You can even bury it a little bit and it's not going to hurt it at all. Some things are a little bit more delicate, but things like mint is not a delicate plant. Neither is oregano, come to think of it. There we go. So you can't even quite see those teeny tiny little shoots, but when I water this, they're going to pop up pretty quick. Just make sure everything is good and watered, and it'll help all those roots settle in. So what you don't see here is instant gratification of pots filled to the absolute brim, spilling over. But in reality, that's not what's best for the plants. They need room to grow. They need room for their roots to grow. So on purpose, I didn't fill these up completely. Now, the perennial one is pretty close. That one actually looks really nice. It's a little bit floppy, but that's because I rudely ripped them out of the ground and then let them sit in the sun for 20 minutes. They'll be perfectly fine. I'm going to put them into the shade actually for a couple of hours and let them sit and rest, and then I'm going to move them into their permanent spots. So when you're planting your herbs, don't forget that they don't all like the same conditions. Be smart about how you're grouping things together and where you're putting them, and then you should be able to enjoy your herbs for much longer into the season. We'll cover the perennial herbs that I have planted into the ground in a separate video because there are quite a few that I didn't cover right here. So be sure to hit like and subscribe so that you won't miss that one, and I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching.